Hi, my name's Alex, and today I'm going to show you 5 tips to take your photos from looking like this to looking like this. Best of all, these don't need any fancy kits. You can use the camera you've already got, get started straight away and start learning. But first of all, we need a subject. So for that, I borrowed my friend's dog called Bramble. So let's jump straight into our first tip. So my first tip is to change your perspective. Everyone takes their shots from roughly head height. It's possibly the most boring thing you can do because, well, it's where everyone sees the world from. So there are 2 ways to do this. You can either get high or get low. Given we're in a field, I think we'll go with the get low. Getting high might be a little tricky here. Nah, that's not going to work. But if you're in a built-up area, you can go upstairs, go on buildings, that sort of thing, try and get a shot facing down, and that'll be a lot different to how most people see the world. It's probably the most important tip you can take from this, so if you only take one and only watch this bit of the video, please do this. It'll instantly transform your photos. So let's get straight to it, get some shots of Bramble, change perspective, and hopefully we'll instantly improve the shot. So I think you'll agree that's made the first shot an awful lot better than it was, instantly transformed it. But I think it's definitely time to find a new location, which ideally we want something which will contrast with Bramble. So because she's a black dog, we need something that's quite light in colour, and that'll sort of naturally frame her in the photo. So let's move on to a new location, see what we can find. Okay, so we've now relocated to a bluebell field on the edge of the woods, and this is looking very good for tip number 2, which is to change your location. The reason I've chosen this area is because the light bluebells will contrast very nicely with the black dog. So if you've got a dark subject, you want to find somewhere light that will contrast and sort of frame your subject and naturally draw your eye to the subject. If you've got something that's a sort of light subject, then you want to find a darker background, which will again do the same thing, just in reverse. So let's crack on, let's get some shots in this stunning bluebell field on the edge of this ancient woodland and see what we can get. So obviously remembering our first tip, we want to get nice and low, so we get a lot of the trees in the background and some of the foreground in as well. Just stop it being a top-down shot of a dog, you know, in a bit of grass and bluebells. Okay, so I think you'll agree that changing the location has really helped. It's really brought out the colours of Bramble, the colours of the fields. It's given the shot a nice sort of general image. But now we do need to get a little bit technical, which is to get that background bokeh sorted out, which is basically the blur in the background, separating your subject from the background, making them stand out even more. Now, the ideal way to do this, if you've got the kit, is a nice lens that has a wide aperture. A lot of companies make a sort of 50mm lens with an f1.8 aperture, and you want to open that lens right up, and that will give you a nice creamy shot with creamy background, subject in focus. It's the ideal piece of kit for the job. However, I did promise you no fancy kit for this, so you can use what you've got. There are a few tricks you can do to make this work. So for those of you who don't want technical details, I'll put a little clip of Bramble running around in the bluebells that you can watch instead of listening to the technical side. For everyone else, here's the tips you can use. If you've got a zoom lens, you can zoom in. So basically what that will do is separate the background from the subject itself, which will really help bring out the picture, and that is probably the easiest trick you can do to get the background separation. You want to keep the aperture open as wide as possible, as wide as your lens allows. So on this kit lens here, I've got up to 200mm, which we'll use, and that will really help us out. Next tip is to separate your subject from the background. If you put the subject further away from the background, then that will also help. When you separate the subject from the background being further away, the camera will naturally blur that out. and that will really help again with the background separation. The last thing to do is remember that you don't want to go too far. You don't want to blur the background so much that you lose all sense of place and where you are, because at the end of the day you've come to the nice location, you've got the nice colours, you want to include some of it. You don't want it to just be a random photo that you could have taken in your back garden. So don't go too much. It will require a bit of playing around, and you just want to find the right sort of zoom and the right f-aperture to make everything work and get the shot you want, which will depend on sort of your artistic vision and what you want from the photo. So let's put that all into practice, and we'll take a few shots and see how we get on. Bramble, that's it. That's looking more like it, I've got to say. So I've got the aperture opened up to f6.3, which is as wide as this lens will go at its sort of maximum zoom of 200 millimeters. Now that is looking really good. I've also made use of this log that we've got in the background, which again is a nice light colour. Okay, I like that. Don't like that sort of tree in the background that sort of appears to be growing out of bramble, which isn't great. I need to be somewhere about here. That's more like it. So moving just a few centimetres can actually make a huge difference with the background and getting the trees sort of lined up how you want them. So that again has improved the shot massively, but it's now time to add the final few touches. So for tip number 4, we're going to start adding some foreground interest. Now, because we're zoomed in and because we're at a wide aperture, this will be blurred out and it will just make your shot look a lot more deliberate over, you know, just taking a shot. You'll have some actual interest in the foreground. It'll also again help to frame the subject. So what I'm hoping for is that we end up with a nice sort of frame of blue around bramble, which will draw your eye into the subject of bramble. And again, because it's all contrasty quite nicely, it'll make it all work. So we're sticking to the same sort of location. We're going to frame her up and yeah, let's try and get some of these nice bluebells in the foreground and just make a nice general composition, just make our shot look quite deliberate. So let's get to it. Got a slight stick in the way of that shot, so let's move a little bit further, which don't really want that branch. This does add a bit more complexity because let's try and make sure you don't cover the subject with the foreground. Okay, that's looking really good, but where we put bramble at the top of this sort of little hill, we sort of lost the blue background, which I don't really want. So if we move bramble somewhere back to where we had sort of over this way, then we should get a nice blue background in it as well. Okay, so that has really helped the photo. It's framed the subject, it's centered the subject, it's made our photo look a lot more deliberate, like it's the photo that we want to take. It sort of fit the artistic vision rather than just being a quick snap that anyone could take on their phone, which I think if you're a proper photographer or aiming to be a proper photographer, that's really what you want to do. The last tip I have is to shoot in good lighting conditions. Now you've got a couple of choices really. If you've got clouds like we have today, it makes the atmosphere like a natural softbox. Really gives you a nice even light, makes it quite easy to shoot a good shot in that, especially when you've got a subject. Next best is sunset or sunrise, which will give your image a nice blue or golden glow, depending on what you're going for. And it's also a nice soft light, so that really helps as well. The worst case really is if you're shooting in the middle of the day. It is possible to do, it just makes everything that much harder. If you do that, you want to try and aim for a location like this where you've got trees, which will give you sort of shadows and give you little puddles of light as the sunlight comes through the trees, and you can arrange your subject to make the most of the light and either get them in the light with then a darker background, and that'll just really help again frame and center your subject. If you're in a studio, then you can obviously control the light, do whatever you like, but I mean, what are you watching this video for? This is a video about shooting outdoors. So I think you'll agree that has really helped. We've gone from a fairly average photo that anyone would take with their phone to something that's a bit more professional that, an actual photographer would take. Hopefully you've learned something. The best thing you can do now is just to get out there, take photos and practice and learn how to do it, basically. If you have learned something, give the video a like so that YouTube shows it to more people, hopefully teaches them something as well. Maybe even consider subscribing so that you get some more tips in the future, more vlogs, that sort of thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.